When I first moved in, I wasn't looking for drama. I just wanted a quiet place close to work, something clean and affordable in the city. The listing was plain: large apartment, shared, must be chill. That's all I needed. After years of carrying other people's baggage, roommates who partied too loud, boyfriends who needed saving, I craved neutrality. Silence. A clean slate. Then I met him. Jake was already on the couch when I arrived, tossing a football in the air like a commercial cliché. Backward cap, sculpted arms, gym shorts, protein shaker on the coffee table, you know the type. He stood, flashed a practiced grin, and said, "Didn't expect a guy like you." I didn't ask what he meant. I'd heard that tone before, the kind that labeled without thinking, complimented while insulting. I just smiled and replied, "Nice to meet you." To be fair, the first few days were tolerable. He stayed in his lane, I stayed in mine. We shared fridge space and rotated trash duty. I worked late hours anyway, running meetings, prepping for launches, building something bigger than what he could see. When I came home, all I wanted was a glass of wine and silence. But silence, in Jake's world, was unnatural. He filled the apartment with noise. The thump of basketball shoes in the hallway, the endless loop of action movies, the rattle of beer bottles against the counter. He wasn't a bad guy, not really. Just loud, crude, oblivious. Then came the jokes. The first time, it was during a football game. One of the players had rainbow laces for Pride Month, and Jake scoffed. "Bet he gets tackled extra hard with those on." He laughed, nudging me. "No offense, man." I didn't flinch. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The second time, he was shirtless in the kitchen after a run. He caught me looking, not in a way I meant to, just human nature, and he chuckled. "Easy, bro. Not your type." I poured my coffee slowly. "You're safe." He laughed again, louder, like I'd confirmed a joke he was already telling in his head. "Nah, you're cool. I like having a gay roommate. Keeps the place clean, you know?" I noted the words, filed them away. Every syllable said more about him than about me. What he didn't know, what none of them ever knew, was that I'd stopped needing to explain myself years ago. I didn't know him my story. He didn't know about the nonprofit I built from scratch, or the app that raised millions in funding last quarter. He hadn't seen the boardrooms where I spoke, the suits that cost more than his rent, the parents who cried in my arms after I helped their queer kid find safety. To him, I was just the quiet guy in the second bedroom. Harmless, soft-spoken, probably lonely. Let him think that. Let him laugh at his own jokes. Because the truth is, I've learned to let people reveal themselves before I ever decide what version of me they get to meet. And Jake? He was revealing more than he realized. He thought I was not his kind of guy. And maybe he was right. But he wasn't ready to find out who I really was. There's a particular kind of silence that grows between people. Not the peaceful kind, but the loaded kind. The kind where you smile without meaning it and nod instead of speaking because it's easier than unraveling all the ways you've been dismissed. That was the silence between me and Jake. He mistook it for passivity. He thought I didn't mind the jokes, that I didn't care when he tossed my pride flag, the small one I kept tucked near the bookshelf, into the closet like it was something indecent. "I thought it was like a decoration," he said when I pulled it out again. "Didn't think you'd be so sensitive about a piece of cloth." I didn't argue. I just folded it carefully and placed it on my desk, like a quiet declaration. I wasn't hiding. I simply didn't need to shout. Not yet. Then came the night he invited his friends over. I walked in after a late strategy session, still half on a call, and found 3 guys in the living room, beers in hand, sneakers on the furniture. Jake was in the middle of a story, something about a coworker he called fruity, complete with lisp impressions and limp wrists. They all laughed. One of them noticed me and elbowed Jake. "Yo, your roommate gonna cancel you now?" Jake smirked. "Nah, he's cool. He's like the chill gay guy. Doesn't get all offended. Ain't that right?" I looked at him. Then I looked at the empty beer cans on my coffee table. The mess, the heat rising in my chest. But I said nothing, just turned around and went to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were trembling, but not from anger, from restraint. Years ago, I might have screamed. I might have demanded they leave, called them names in return, or worse, tried to explain myself. But I've outgrown that. Rage is a wildfire. It burns everything, even the parts of you worth protecting. I took a breath and let the stillness settle over me like armor. Then I reached into the drawer and pulled out the notebook I hadn't touched in months. The one where I write down my plans when I need to sharpen the edges of my focus. I started sketching a new timeline. Not for revenge. For clarity. I'd been thinking about moving anyway. I was due for a shift. My app had been picked up for beta testing at a major startup incubator. I had interviews scheduled with a few publications. Things were moving fast, and I needed space that matched the life I was building. But before I left, I wanted Jake to see me. Really see me. Not because I needed validation, but because he needed to understand. The people you mock in the dark sometimes own the building you're standing in. The next morning, I left early. By the time Jake rolled out of bed, I'd already met with my developers, signed off on a keynote speech for an upcoming fundraiser, and sent an RSVP to a charity gala I'd been invited to speak at, one his company was coincidentally sponsoring. The universe has a wicked sense of timing. I stayed in my lane. Always have. But Jake? Jake didn't just swerve, he took a crowbar to the guardrails. He thought he was punching down. He didn't realize I'd been climbing all along. The gala was held in the kind of ballroom that turns sound into silk. Vaulted ceilings, gold-trimmed pillars, soft jazz curling through the air like perfume. I hadn't been in a space like that in a while, not since before the lockdowns, and I'd forgotten how good it felt to wear a tux that actually fit, to move through a room with a sense of quiet ownership. Not arrogance, just presence. I arrived early, as I always do, to get my head clear before speaking. The event was a benefit for LGBTQ+ youth shelters across the city, and part of the proceeds were going toward expanding our tech literacy program, the one I'd built from the ground up after realizing how many queer kids aged out of the system with no digital skills, no networks, no plan B. They called it the Bridge Initiative. I just called it necessary. Tonight, I was one of 3 honorees. I'd be introduced with a short video, say a few words, shake a few hands. The usual. I was prepared. What I wasn't prepared for was Jake. He walked in with a few coworkers around 8 o'clock, wearing slacks and a blazer. No tie, collar open, hair pushed back in that careless way he thinks makes him look rich. He looked completely out of place. Not just underdressed, unaware. When I spotted the company logo on the event banner behind him, it all clicked. They were a corporate sponsor. Probably a last-minute check signed without much attention paid. He must have tagged along for the open bar. I stood near the back of the ballroom, sipping club soda, watching as he wandered past the photo booth and into the main seating area. He didn't see me. Not yet. The host took the mic, lights dimmed. The room fell into an elegant hush. First came the opening remarks, then a tribute video to the night's honorees. Mine played second. There I was, on screen, speaking calmly about resilience, access, and how a single adult showing up for a queer kid can change the trajectory of their life. Clips of our mentorship sessions, youth coding workshops, and gala planning meetings flashed by. Then came the numbers, our growth, our impact, our funding, and finally a short quote from me. Visibility isn't just about being seen. It's about being safe when you are. Applause filled the room. When the lights came back up, the host announced, "Please welcome our next honoree, a tech innovator, advocate, and founder of the Bridge Initiative." And then my name. As I walked to the stage, I scanned the crowd, not for validation, but for the reckoning. And there he was. Jake sat dead center, a glass of wine frozen halfway to his lips. His face drained of color. His mouth hung slightly open. He looked like someone who'd walked into a story halfway through and realized it was about him. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I spoke. Calm. Direct. Measured. The way I always do when the room is finally listening. I used to think the hardest part of being different was being ignored. But it's not. The hardest part is being erased. Treated like a joke. A decoration. A phase. I paused. But what they didn't know was that we were building something underneath. Quietly, fiercely, together. The applause this time wasn't polite. It was emotional. When I stepped down, I didn't look for him again. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, Jake saw me. Really saw me. Not the roommate in joggers. Not the guy who stayed quiet when he joked. But the man who stood on a stage in front of hundreds and owned it. The shift was subtle at first. The morning after the gala, Jake was already up when I came out of my room. A rarity. Usually I was the one making coffee, the one picking up his cereal boxes left on the counter. But that day he stood there awkwardly, holding out a mug like we were friends. "Morning," he said, too brightly. "Didn't hear you come in last night." He didn't need to say it. His eyes already had. He'd seen everything. "My name was on the billboard," I replied casually. "Kind of hard to miss." He laughed too quickly, like he was still trying to calibrate his new tone. "Yeah, man, that was whoa. Didn't expect that. Didn't know you were, like, important." I didn't respond. I just took the coffee, nodded, and sat down at the table like nothing was different. Because, to me, it wasn't. I'd always known who I was. Jake was just catching up. Over the next few days, his behavior went from awkwardly polite to borderline performative. He started asking about my work, not real questions, but the kind people ask when they're trying to sound supportive. "So, what exactly do you guys do with the, coding stuff? That kid you helped. Is he okay now?" He never listened long enough to hear the answer. He was trying, in his own clumsy, ego-bruised way. But it wasn't kindness. It was damage control. One night he knocked on my door, another first. I opened it to find him standing there with a six-pack and a hesitant expression. "Hey," I figured, "we haven't really hung out. Maybe we could, grab a drink?" My treat. I leaned against the doorframe. "Why now?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I guess I was just being a jerk. Didn't realize you were. I didn't mean any harm before. You're cool. Actually, you're kind of badass, man." There it was. The clumsy, backhanded compliment. The need to rewrite his own behavior as just messing around. To soften the edges of what he'd done now that it no longer served him. "I don't need a beer," I said. "But I do need honesty. Can you do that?" He blinked. "Yeah, sure." I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at opposite ends of the couch, a careful space between us. He opened a can. Tried again. "I was stupid. I said things I shouldn't have. I didn't know who you were." That was the part he couldn't stop circling back to. Who I was. As if the value of a person hinged on resumes and speeches. As if being decent only applied once someone earned a title. I let the silence linger until it felt like a mirror. Then I said, softly but clearly, "You didn't know who I really was." He nodded, relieved that I'd repeated his line. But I wasn't finished. I turned to him, calm, composed. "But I've always known who you are." That stopped him. He stared, like he didn't quite understand. "I've known since the first joke," I said. "Since the smirk when you threw away my flag. Since your friends came over and laughed at people like me in front of my face. I knew who you were when you thought no one important was watching." He swallowed. "I didn't mean it like." I held up a hand. "I'm not asking for an apology. I'm just telling you the truth. You didn't hurt me. You revealed yourself. And now you're trying to repaint it because the lighting changed." Jake looked away. He didn't have a comeback for that. The air between us turned heavy with everything he couldn't undo. After a while I stood. "I've got a call in the morning." He got the hint. He left the room, the unopened beers still sweating on the coffee table. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. He could call me badass now. He could act impressed. He could try to rewrite the story. But I didn't need his validation. And I'd never needed his friendship. I always knew he'd snoop. It was only a matter of time. There's a certain itch some people can't resist once their worldview cracks. Jake had spent weeks stuffing me into a box labeled, "Quiet Gay Roommate," only to watch me walk on stage in a tux while strangers cheered. He'd apologized, sure, but his curiosity still burned in his silence. I could see it when he passed my door, when his voice got more polite, when his eyes lingered on the closed cabinet near my desk. People like Jake can't handle not knowing. Not really knowing. So I left the drawer unlocked. Not in malice, just permission. Quiet permission. Inside were the things I never put on display. A photo of me and Congresswoman Diaz, arms around each other after a policy panel. A framed note from a teenage boy named Elijah who once emailed me from a shelter in Ohio. "You made me feel like I could live, like I was worth something." An invitation to the White House Pride reception from 3 years ago, signed in the corner by the Director of National Outreach. An old lanyard from a tech conference where I gave the keynote in front of 1,000 engineers. And a velvet box with the LGBTQ plus Advocate of the Year medal inside. Still unpolished but heavy with memory. I wasn't ashamed of any of it. I just didn't need to perform it for anyone. But Jake needed to see it because Jake only believed what he could touch. That Saturday, I left the apartment early, told him I'd be out late, made sure to leave the bedroom door slightly ajar. When I returned that evening, the air was different. Still, stiff, like the walls themselves were pretending nothing had happened. He was in the living room watching TV with the volume too low to matter. "Hey," he said when I walked in, voice strained. "How was your day?" "Busy," I replied, dropping my keys into the bowl. "Yours?" He paused. "Just hung around." I nodded. "Cool." I didn't mention the faint shift of the drawer, the way the items were res-tacked, slightly neater than I'd left them, or the note I'd placed just beneath Elijah's letter. I walked past him into my room, and when I returned to the kitchen for a glass of water, the note was gone. He'd read it. I didn't need to ask. I knew it by the way he kept glancing at me that night, as if hoping I'd say something. Accuse him, explode, do something that would let him off the hook. But I didn't. I just moved through the space like I always had. Quiet, observant, decided. The next morning, he tried again. "I saw some of your stuff yesterday," he said, leaning against the doorframe as I packed my gym bag. "In your room." I zipped the bag slowly. "I know." He looked down. "That note." I didn't turn around, just repeated the words, calm and clear. "You mocked someone who made space for you. Think about that." He opened his mouth, maybe to defend himself, maybe to say he didn't mean to, that it was a mistake. But there was no room left for that. No more explaining away cruelty with ignorance. I looked up. "You didn't hurt me, Jake. You just revealed who you are when you think no one's looking. And now you've seen who I am. So, what happens next? That's on you." He stood there a moment too long, then nodded, slowly. "Yeah, I guess it is." I walked past him, bag slung over my shoulder. He didn't follow. That day, I finalized my move-out date. Signed a lease on a downtown loft that overlooked the park. High ceilings, hardwood floors, peace. Jake still had 30 days to figure out who he was without the buffer of my silence. I didn't need an apology anymore. I'd already reclaimed my name. The notice went up on the fridge like any other memo. Printed, clipped neatly with a magnet that said "Don't be a dick." I didn't draw attention to it. Just stuck it there one Thursday morning before heading out. 30 days. I was officially moving out. The new place was everything this one wasn't. Wide windows, clean lines, floors that didn't creak like they were holding their breath. It sat on the 19th floor of a glass building overlooking the city. My name was on the lease. My company's logo was etched on the plaque in the lobby. I'd signed the paperwork the same day our app crossed its 500,000 user milestone. It wasn't just a move. It was a step into the life I'd built brick by brick, with quiet, unseen labor. When I returned that evening, Jake was sitting at the dining table, staring at the note like it might change if he looked long enough. "So, it's real?" he asked. I opened a cabinet and pulled out a glass. "Yep." He let out a breath. "You didn't say anything." "There wasn't anything to say," I replied, filling my glass with water. "It was always temporary." He stood, walked to the living room, then circled back like he couldn't sit still. "Is it because of me?" I sipped slowly. "No." He blinked. "Really? It's not about you, Jake. It never was. I'm just ready for more space. My life's expanding. That's all." He nodded, but his hands flexed at his sides, like he was trying to grip something slipping through his fingers. For a few days, he barely spoke. The apartment grew quieter than it had ever been. No more loud music. No half-baked jokes.
No performative compliments.
Just silence, the kind I'd wanted when I first moved in. I spent those weeks packing with calm precision. Each book, each award, each framed letter had its own place. I boxed up the flag, too, folded neatly now. It had nothing to prove. Jake hovered a few times, brought up irrelevant topics, offered to help move furniture I didn't ask him to touch. And then, on the final weekend, he finally said it. "You were right," he told me, "about who I was." I didn't look up from the box I was sealing. "Yeah," he swallowed. "I guess I just thought. I don't know. I thought I was better than that." "We all do," I said. There was a long pause. Then, "I was proud of you. That night. At the gala." I glanced at him. His posture was slouched. Vulnerable. Unsure. For once, no armor of bravado. "Thanks," I said. Another silence bloomed between us, but this one felt less like a wound and more like a thread we'd stopped pulling. Finally, he asked, "So, are we going to keep in touch?" I smiled. It was a kind smile, but not a yes. "You liked me better," I said, "when you didn't know me." His face twitched, a flicker of discomfort he couldn't hide. He knew it was true. When I moved out the next morning, he didn't try to stop me. Just stood by the door, hands in his pockets, watching as I wheeled out the last suitcase. "You ever need anything?" he started, voice trailing. I paused at the threshold. "I won't," I said gently. Then I walked out into the morning sun. The elevator down was quiet, a moment to breathe, and when the doors opened into the lobby, I didn't look back. Some people only learn when silence stops protecting them. Some only grow when their comfort is challenged. I wasn't waiting around to find out which one Jake would be. I was already on my way up, in every sense of the word. The feature dropped on a Tuesday morning. I hadn't been waiting for it. Not exactly. The writer had interviewed me weeks earlier, a thoughtful young journalist who asked the kind of questions most people don't. Not just about my company's growth or the new mentorship program we'd launched, but about the why behind it all. She'd asked about the closet, about survival, about the anger that used to live just beneath my ribs and how I'd learned not to feed it. I told her the truth. I stopped trying to be heard by people who refused to listen. The piece was called More Than a Founder: How One Man is Building Space for Others to Breathe. It was long, vulnerable, unapologetically queer, and somehow still kind. By noon, my inbox was flooded. Hundreds of emails, DMs, comments from strangers and friends and long-lost classmates I hadn't thought about in years. But it was the messages from the kids that broke me open. "I read your story in my school library and cried. I didn't know we could grow up and still be soft. I'm 16 and scared, but your interview made me think maybe I'll make it too. You made me feel seen. Thank you." I was sitting on my balcony when I read them, feet up on the railing, sun dipping low behind the skyline. My phone buzzed constantly, but I ignored it. Let the noise roll past. I wasn't chasing any of it, just letting it arrive. A mug of chamomile cooled in my hands. The city below moved in soft waves. Traffic, laughter, footsteps. But up here it was quiet, still, like the moment had settled around me and said, "This is yours. You earned this." Behind me, the sliding glass door was half open. My living room glowed with warm light, the framed letter from Elijah now resting beside my bookshelf, no longer hidden away. The metal was mounted above my desk, not for ego, but as a promise to myself that I wouldn't shrink again for the comfort of others. And somewhere, not far from here, Jake sat alone in a too-quiet apartment. He'd found the article. Of course he had. I pictured him there, hunched over his laptop, the interview playing softly. My voice steady, my eyes clear. On screen, I said something near the end that stuck with people. It wasn't rehearsed, just something that came out when the journalist asked, "What do you say to people who treated you like you didn't matter before they found out who you were?" And I'd answered simply, "I wasn't hiding. You just weren't looking." I imagined that was the moment he paused the video. Maybe he leaned back in his chair. Maybe he closed the screen. Or maybe, just maybe, he sat there, hearing the truth land in a way my silence never could. We hadn't spoken since I left. Not once.
No texts.
No calls. No tagged posts. Just space. But sometimes the loudest conversations are the ones never spoken. And in that space, I let go of the weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying. The urge to fix, to explain, to be understood by people who weren't ready. Jake had mocked what he didn't understand. He missed the chance to know someone real. Someone who would have welcomed him, flaws and all, if he'd just shown up with decency. But that was his loss, not mine. I didn't hate him. I wasn't even angry anymore. Because anger ties you to the person who hurt you. And I'd cut the rope. Now I was just free. Free to live in color. Free to be loud when I wanted, quiet when I chose. Free to love, to lead, to build. Free to walk into any room, not because of who I'd become, but because I'd stopped asking for permission to exist. I stood from the balcony and stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The city pulsed gently beneath my windows. And above it, so did I. Have you ever been underestimated, only to rise above it? Or had someone finally see your worth too late? Tell me your story in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear it. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs a quiet reminder. You don't have to yell to be powerful. You just have to be seen.